Viscoplastic Energy Model and Business Management Part 1, number 1634, the 8th of May 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, VPT Management. Preface, today is May 8, 2026. During a long period of reflection on my diabetes research, post-stroke recovery, systems engineering background, and nearly 2 decades of top-tier business management experience and philosophy, I suddenly realized that core viscoplastic energy method I have been applying in my medical research work during the past 17 years shares important conceptual similarities with the basic principles of business management that I learned from my MBA studies in San Francisco and from industrial practice in Silicon Valley between 1979 and 2002. This realization surprised even me. During my years at MIT studying aerospace engineering, I learned FEM as a method for solving complicated engineering systems by decomposing continuous partial differential equations into smaller solvable algebraic components. I also learned dynamic plasticity and time-dependent structural behavior later. During my high-tech engineering career in Silicon Valley, I applied similar systems methodologies to many complicated engineering and industrial problems, including semiconductor chip design automation, systems for various engineering applications, and large-scale organizational structure and people management, including managing thousands of top-tier ECS engineers and PhDs. However, only last night did I fully recognize that my biomedical research methodology follows a remarkably similar conceptual pathway in both business and people management. The human biomedical system is one of the most complicated nonlinear systems known. Exact analytical solutions are practically impossible. Therefore, during the past 17 years, I gradually developed a practical math, physics, and engineering style approach by decomposing the biomedical system into a few dominant interacting variables such as fewer than 5, including glucose, blood pressure, body weight, visceral fat, food intake, exercise, sleep, and other lifestyle factors. I then normalized, monitored, analyzed, and reconstructed the overall system behavior through long-term longitudinal observation, trajectory analysis, and viscoplastic energy modeling. In many ways, this resembles how FEM decomposes an overwhelmingly complicated continuum system into manageable interacting elements for numerical approximation and systems analysis. This realization may partially explain why my medical research methodology differs substantially from most traditional statistical-based medical research methods. My approach has always focused more on system behavior, trajectory, interaction, time and path dependency, accumulated loading, nonlinear adaptation, and delayed phase transition rather than only statistical average and correlations or isolated static snapshots. This discussion also led me to recognize another important extension of this framework, combining VMT viscoplastic medicine theory with topology and topological data analysis (TD) into a new concept that I call VPT viscoplastopology. Within this VPT framework, VMT describes energy magnitude and accumulated stress loading behavior. Topology describes geometric trajectory, continuity, and directional movement, while VPT combines both energy evolution and geometric pathway into one unified longitudinal biomedical systems interpretation. This realization may become one of the most important conceptual developments in my recent biomedical research journey. Introduction: from Silicon Valley management to biomedical systems. Before entering biomedical research, I spent many years in Silicon Valley building 7 high-tech startup companies and managing several large high-tech organizations. During those 20-plus years from 1981 through 2002, I was fortunate to become one of the top-performing CEOs on the NASDAQ market in the semiconductor, chip design, and AI algorithm-based industries. At that time, like most business companies, I used relatively traditional linear performance and reward systems. Employees and managers were evaluated mainly through direct measurable outputs such as revenue, cost, profit, productivity, quarterly growth, and operational performance. These systems are commonly known as KPI systems. KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator. It is a management framework that measures performance using numerical targets and short-term business metrics. KPI systems are simple, understandable, and psychologically effective because employees can easily see the relationship between effort and reward. However, last night, I suddenly realized that these traditional linear systems may not truly capture how organizations actually behave. Real business organizations are not linear systems. In reality, business organizations consist of people, who are often the most complicated and manipulative components within the business system. Therefore, organizational behavior becomes nonlinear, dynamic, path-dependent, time-dependent, and continuously influenced by accumulated historical loading, exactly like the biomedical system. I believe that biomedical symptoms mainly reflect internal pathophysiology, while human behaviors largely reflect external psychology. Traditional P systems useful but incomplete. Traditional KPI systems mainly evaluate final output, short-term performance, and isolated financial snapshots. For example, if quarterly profit increased 10%, reward the manager. This approach is administratively simple and easy to communicate. However, it often misses the hidden structural behavior underneath the visible numbers. The manager may produce short-term profit growth, while simultaneously overloading employees, damaging product quality, weakening long-term innovation, increasing technical or emotional debt, or destabilizing organizational culture. Linear KPI systems often reward these short-term spikes because they mainly measure visible output instead of long-term system health. This problem became much clearer to me after conducting biomedical research for more than 16 years. In medicine, I learned that small daily corrections repeated consistently over many years can eventually produce major system transition, while large short-term interventions may produce only temporary superficial improvement. For example, the relationship between lifestyle and disease is no linear. It behaves much more like a viscoelastic or viscoplastic system with delayed adaptation, accumulated loading, hysteresis, strain rate sensitivity, and nonlinear threshold transition. Today, I suddenly realized that business organizations behave similarly. Viscoplastic management, a dynamic systems approach. This realization led me to think about a completely different type of management system, a VMT-based viscoplastic organizational model. Instead of evaluating organizations through static quarterly numbers alone, organizations could potentially be analyzed as dynamic adaptive systems. For example, suppose I observe 8 quarters, 8 time points, and continuous system evolution. The output strain could be profit growth, market share, productivity, or operational efficiency. The input stresses could include revenue generation, expense structure, engineering productivity, innovation intensity, organizational stability, and operational loading. Then, the system could be analyzed using output strain rate, normalized stress, stress strain energy, accumulated VMT energy percentages, and long-term trajectory behavior. Instead of measuring only what was the final profit, the deeper question becomes, how did the organization really behave while generating that profit? This is a fundamentally different management philosophy. Dynamic organizational energy. Within this framework, organizations can be viewed as dynamic continuum systems. Important system behaviors include accumulated strengthening, accumulated damage, delayed response, organizational memory, nonlinear adaptation, and threshold transition. For example, 2 divisions may generate identical profit, but one may consume far more organizational energy through political maneuvering, personnel instability, excessive meetings, human resource burnout, and internal conflict. Traditional KPI systems may treat them equally, but a viscoplastic framework would not. Similarly, some organizational investments may not show immediate reward. Long-term R&D investment, architecture decisions, structured mentoring, positive culture building, and long-term engineering quality. Traditional KPI systems often punish delayed value contributions because they emphasize short-term visible output. However, dynamic systems analysis recognizes that many important organizational improvements require long accumulation periods before nonlinear strengthening becomes visible. It also could help avoid long-term damage accumulation. Path dependency and organizational memory. One of the most important concepts in viscoplastic management is path dependency. The same final profit can arise from very different organizational pathways. For example, stable gradual growth versus chaotic short-term surge. Traditional KPI systems often focus only on the final numerical result. However, organizations remember previous loading history. Examples include employee burnout, customer distrust, technical debt, management fatigue, and engineering instability. These hidden stresses may not appear immediately in accounting reports, but they strongly influence future organizational behavior. This is very similar to chronic Disease progression into mortality. Diseases in medicine. The body may appear stable temporarily while hidden vascular damage, inflammation, and metabolic stress continue accumulating underneath. Eventually, a delayed phase transition occurs. Organizations behave similarly. Strain rate sensitivity and threshold transition. Another important concept is strain rate sensitivity. In viscoplastic systems, rapid loading often produces very different behavior compared with gradual loading. Organizations also behave this way. Rapid aggressive growth may temporarily increase profit while simultaneously generating instability, communication breakdown, technical failure, or employee exhaustion. Some business systems can tolerate stress temporarily, but once the loading threshold is exceeded, nonlinear collapse may suddenly occur. This is why many organizations appear stable until sudden restructuring, mass resignations, technological failure, or rapid competitive decline. The same principle exists in medicine. For example, my own diabetes research showed that metabolic improvement did not occur linearly for approximately 10 years, from 2010 to 2020. My glucose system accumulated gradual corrective energy before eventually reaching a delayed transition point around 2020. When my fasting glucose behavior finally shifted into a much more stable operating condition, this stabilization of pancreatic beta cell insulin function was far more effective than relying solely on diabetes medications. The same systems principle may apply to most business organizations. The communication problem, however, there is also an important practical problem. Human beings require understandable incentives, visible fairness, and psychologically clear reward structures. This is why traditional KPI systems remain effective despite their limitations. Employees can easily understand effort target greater than reward. The challenge is that the true organizational system underneath is much more complicated than the simplified presentation layer. Therefore, the solution may not be to replace simple communication entirely, but rather to maintain clear and understandable communication externally while internally applying deeper nonlinear systems analysis for management insight and strategic decision-making. This realization is very similar to medicine. The biomedical system itself is enormously complicated, but patients still require simple behavioral guidance, understandable lifestyle rules, and practical daily actions. The underlying system may be nonlinear and viscoplastic, but the communication layer must remain humanly understandable. This is part 1.